Isaac Sarason is a skilled hacker, formerly employed by British Telecom-Sprint. When his health failed, Isaac did the only thing he could think of. He ran. He found a haven in a working-class district of the city known as Little Russia. There Isaac took on a new name, Ishmael. He then became embroiled in the affairs of a brutal member of the Lamadiza organized crime family, known as Leo. Convinced by his longtime friend Frankie to flee from his commitments to the Lamadiza family, Isaac found himself hunted by the ruthless Leo. On a rooftop, far from witnesses, Leo murdered Frankie. Only through the use of his skills as a hacker was Isaac able to drive Leo off. Wounded, alone, and far from help, Isaac depended on the kindness of strangers. One stranger, a burqa-wearing doctor known as Fatima, took pity on Isaac and helped him make his way to the mysterious Star X line. At the end of all hope, they found the Star X line and the slim promise that the enigmatic beings behind the Star X could save Isaac from the implants which destroyed his life. What do you do when those who saved you have recorded everything you are? What do you do when your every action is tracked by the Keylogger? Colbyjack.net is proud to present Firmware Keylogger, the third installment in the firmware pentology by Colbytrax. 00-01-11. The city, this beast we live in, was just too vast to make sense. 1 in a million events happened every day, and yet there were people who never ventured more than a mile from the place they were born in their entire life. Take Nona, for example. I had spent untold hours tracking her movements through ancient archives housed in forgotten tunnels dug miles beneath the city. Last year, just shy of 20 cubic yards of data was added. Next year, it would be over 22 cubic yards, and the year after that, 26. Some of the growth comes from population growth, but the rest comes from a desire to not forget anything. Though, of course, this means that everything was forgotten. I could complain about the lack of curated content, the lack of editing of the footage, for who really needs a continuous feed of a security camera mounted on a candy machine located behind the 18L entrance tunnel at the Huron View Center for the Performing Arts. A simple audit of the machine's sales record showed that the machine contained only 5 selections, as those were the favorites of Security Officer James Hugh. That's right. Security Officer James Hugh had his own personal vending machine. Not because he wanted it that way. No, the true answer was much more insidious. The Huron View Center for the Performing Arts, or HVC, was home to the HVC Symphonic Orchestra, HVC-SO, the HVC Ballet Company, HVC-BC, and the Wayward Players. The HVC-SO was one of the city's 150 orchestras with a budget in excess of 2 million joules. They were a real star among the over 1,500 symphony orchestras which dotted the city. True working professionals, the HVC-SO put on a grueling series of 12 different programs each year. Each performed an average of 5 times, or 60 shows a year. Not a lot of fans of Reese Choco Butters or Snap Pop Bubblegum in that group. The HVC-BC held 80 performances a year and ran their own snack bar during the shows, and the Wayward Players used the rest of the calendar to present reinterpretation of plays originally intended for television. Their current program schedule was halfway through its 144-performance schedule of what the Wayward Players were calling Whedon's Buffy Cycle. Last season, they performed the epic space opera cycle of Stravinsky, Babylon Dreaming, and next year they were slated to do Moore's classic Dreams of Earth, the story of the last remnants of another humanity searching for Earth. Even with their addiction to the epics of a lost generation, it was safe to say that the vending machine sold no candy to their audience, as they funded their reenactments through a very well-stocked bar and canteen. For every jewel they took in from ticket sales, they took in 5 from food and drink sales. Nice work if you can get it. What this did leave us with was one customer for the vending machine behind the 18L entrance tunnel to the HVC, one security officer, James Hugh. As an interesting aside, it appeared that at the 1U entrance tunnel, there was a vending machine for Security Officer Favor Deng, who worked the shift Security Officer Hugh didn't. It also appeared that the various weekend and weekday security officers preferred the coffee shop around the corner or the bodega across the street. But those were other stories for other times. Now back to James. James was an elderly gentleman in his early aughts. A former beat cop from the early days of the city charter, even he couldn't remember a time when the city wasn't a fact of life. He walked the halls of the CVC 5 nights a week after the performances until the first light of day. The canteens and bars of the HVC were closed before he started work, and the city was just waking up when he finished his shift. Thus, his only source of snacks was the 18L tunnel machine. Sales showed that he purchased treats at 3 different times each night. The first was at 1, the second at 3, and the last at 5. The record showed that less than one purchase in 300 was made outside of these times. If James was off work, the machine made no sales. If it wasn't for the extended shelf life of modern snack foods and the low energy use of the vending machine, the machine would have been removed years ago. As it was, without trying, James had become the virtual owner of a vending machine which only stocked what he ate. When new products came on the market, the machine would order a sample for James, and if he ate more than 3 in a week, it would be added to the lineup of the machine. The point of this whole study into the habits of James and the HVC was to show the type of data contained in the city's ever-growing data archive. A quick statistical study showed me that there were over 30,000 vending machines scattered across the city who operated under conditions similar to the one at 18L HVC, and each and every one of them recorded everything which happened around them and sent it off to be stored in the city's slowly expanding archive. Not that the data was all a waste. Through the use of facial recognition systems and hordes of ubiquitous cameras, I was able to create a statistical model of known as movements. I knew her favorite paths. I saw how they changed with her escape from the nesting doll, and I knew with an extremely high level of certainty where she was living. At first, I hadn't been able to figure out how she would just appear out of nowhere on a random camera around Little Russia and then disappear again. It took a bit of watching and waiting to determine that Nona was using the Underroad network. How she avoided detection was through the use of masks and headscarves. She'd enter a building with an entrance to the Underroad network, which in Little Russia were scattered about the neighborhood almost at random. When she was in the dead spaces between camera systems, she would put on a simple mask of rubber and cloth, wrap a headscarf around her head, and disappear from the facial recognition system. The methods she used to avoid detection were not the most advanced, nor the newest ideas under the sun. Police for centuries have been trying to get the use of masks in protests banned so they could more easily target the protesters when they weren't in mobs. As it was, the protesters understood the simple idea and kept wearing the masks even when the laws turned hostile and made concealing your face in public a criminal offense. They were going to be arrested anyway. Why worry about which laws they were breaking? In Nona's case, though, once I found her, it wasn't possible to fool me again. Whereas a normal human police officer would be limited by the amount of data she could parse and separations of databases which made it difficult for her to bring every last bit of identifying data into play. I had no such limitations now. I could watch both the camera network, which continually shifted in relation to Nona and her movements, and the network of data, which moved all around the dodging form I thought of as Nona. With only the cameras as an anchor, I would have lost her. But by being able to both watch her and track the data signatures which bounced through the networks around her, I was able to determine which among all those millions of individual voices was her phone. Once I had isolated her phone from the screaming babble which is a normal city street, I was able to begin filtering the other constants of her life. Her Coach Vuitton running suit was an obvious giveaway. The running suit was designed from the ground up to create the greatest level of visual distress in an environment by analyzing the world around it and adjusting accordingly, automatically. The suit also had a manual setting, which I had witnessed a million years ago in the Red Square, when Leo frowned at Nona and she turned the suit down to something more respectable. While those were the 2 official settings, there were a lot of aftermarket modifications, which were quite easy to find on the net. These modifications weren't illegal, as there was no way to hurt someone by changing the way a Coach Vuitton anti-chameleon running suit operated, and thus it took little or no skill to discover how to reprogram your expensive running toy. One of the most interesting adjustments one could do with a reprogrammed Coach Vuitton was to give it a chameleon setting. Instead of contrasting harshly with its environment, a rooted Coach Vuitton anti-chameleon running suit could be adjusted to disappear in broad daylight. The only thing which would give it away was a shimmer in the air. It was only after I realized just how easy it was to root a Coach Vuitton that I realized how Nicole had gotten past the police in the nesting doll. He had gotten past them because they would only stop what they could see. If Nicole ran as fast as I remembered him doing up and down Tbilisi Avenue, then those cops didn't stand a chance in hell of stopping him. They probably hadn't seen him. But then, Nicole didn't own a Coach Vuitton. He owned an Epemipo running suit. The fabric of his suit was smart materials, but they weren't designed to react to their environment. They played back programs which Nicole had set up in advance. I checked the price on a Coach Vuitton and realized how much Nona must have wanted that running suit in the first place. Even when I worked at British Telecom-Sprint, I would have blanched at the price tag on that unit. Where had Nicole gotten the money? Actually, where had Nona gotten it in the first place? Did their courier work pay that well? Or did Nona have sidelines she hadn't shared with me in our ever-so-brief time together? I thought back to the street before the nesting doll and the smile on Sergio Lobedizza's face as he watched the police surrounding the nesting doll, and how he had talked to Nicole right before everything had gone down. It had to be him. A quick glance at records for the local Coach Vuitton boutique showed at least a dozen purchases of their patented anti-chameleon running suits in the month leading up to Nona's escape into the Underroad network. Big data was letting me down. There was just so much, and I so wanted to know for sure. I had to stop this. I didn't have to know everything that happened, only that it did. That was the worst part of my condition, the constant desire to unravel every thread of every story. There were over 300 million such stories in the city. If I had to get my focus tight onto what was before me, I would never get anything done. I'd breathe deep if I could, but I know that feeling was but an illusion. So, I pushed my need to know everything aside and concentrated on what was important. Nona wore a Coach Vuitton anti-chameleon running suit which had been rooted and reprogrammed, so it now also functioned as a nearly perfect chameleon system. A nifty solution to the enormous cost a unit marketed as a chameleon suit would go for. While a Coach Vuitton anti-chameleon running suit and a Cabela's Guideware Series camouflage suit used similar materials, identical in many cases down to the base firmware, the Cabela's suit was programmed not to work in any environment where a minimum level of short-range wireless connections were available. Besides, it was a much more expensive unit. Not because of its materials. As said before, the unit was nearly identical to a Coach Vuitton running suit. No, it was more expensive because of who it was marketed to. The Cabela's Guideware Predator Series 6 active camouflage system was marketed to people who had the ways and means to travel far into the boonies and kill a woodland critter with some of the most expensive toys known to man. Besides the rare big-game hunter who thought a deer would stand a chance against a rifle with a 3-mile effective range, the other people who wanted active camouflage were the military, certain specialized police units, and perverts. Since hunters would pay any price for a greater advantage over a squirrel, cat, or whatever it was these people hunted out in the emptiness beyond the networks, and the trinity of military, police, and perverts would pay any price to do what they wanted to do, the price was kept extremely high. So, for the smart kid with access to a net connection and a couple adapters, the Coach Vuitton anti-chameleon suit was a gift from heaven. That the Coach Vuitton suit emitted a series of continuous signals as part of its never-ending computations into what color matched best with the world around the suit was not something most people even realized was happening. These signals were unique to the suit Nona was wearing, as every computational activity conducted by the suit was encrypted to make it 3 seconds harder for your average hacker to learn how it worked. The encryption, having a unique key for the suit, produced a signal with unique patterns which identified the user. A feature law enforcement always wanted, but the manufacturers had failed to include, though was there nonetheless. It was through this unintended identifying signature I tracked her. With the facial recognition crossed with her phone and her running suit signals, it was nearly impossible for her to escape me. In order to guarantee I would never lose her again, I harvested the identifying data of her social networks, music subscriptions, and favorite video channels. Even if she disposed of all of her gear and hid in a box, I would find her again as long as she returned to her favorite entertainment choices. It wasn't that Nona wasn't hiding. She was. In every sense of the word, she was underground, hiding her movements, staying below radar. But then I wasn't looking for her in a way anyone not me would. I had the ability, I discovered, to monitor every bit of network traffic within a 2-mile radius of the Red Square. That doesn't seem like so much, unless you realize that within 2 miles of the Red Square on Tbilisi Avenue lived over 1/3 people. That's right, I was monitoring a fire hose of data, which would have overwhelmed a team of dedicated data analysts in the first seconds of the deluge. I was keeping up. In fact, I was getting in front of the data wave, pruning it down, removing those who I had no need to follow. I pruned and removed individuals from my feed, slowly narrowing my data down until I found what I was looking for. The anonymous usage statistics of one Nona Kazbegi. If they were anonymous, how did I know they were hers? Points of reference, inference, the fact that her data streams intersected with those of Sergio Lumidizza, Irma, Pixie, Chabukiani, and Nikoli Androvich. Pixie and Nicole made sense. They were known as friends from the streets of Little Russia. Pixie and Nono grew up under the abusive and watchful eyes of Bebia Chakomia. Nicole was the boy she worked a node of SneakerNet with. Now Sergio, that added a level of complexity to the issue I wasn't very happy with. Obviously, Sergio was someone everyone in Little Russia intersected with, but not to the extent Nona did. Her anonymous phone, the same one she entertained herself on and communicated with Pixie and Nicole, had also been in direct contact with Sergio. She hadn't been contacted by his official phone. No, she had been contacted at least 24 times for the last 12 weeks via a VoIP phone Sergio carried in a pocket opposite his official phone. A VoIP phone whose call history contained only one number, Nona's. Sergio's life was wrapped around Nona's in a manner I couldn't fathom. Was she working for him? Was her escape orchestrated by him? Who was paying her bills, buying her toys like her Coach Vuitton running suit and subscriptions to music and movie sites? It had to be Sergio. My regard for the man plummeted. For some reason, I had always thought of Sergio as an honorable man. Sure, he was a gangster lording over the inhabitants of Little Russia from his table in the tea room behind the Red Square. But he had been an honorable gangster, the kind of gangster one saw in the movies. He was supposed to be the kind of gangster who used his power and influences to protect the little people of his neighborhood from the oppressive forces of the city. But he wasn't. He was just another man using Nona to achieve his own aims. He was a man who saw no problem using a girl, barely a woman, to do the work he didn't want to do, to kill the men his men couldn't be caught killing. He was no different than Leo. He was a killer who wanted to keep his hands clean. Oh, he would suffer for this. Of that I was sure. But first I had to know where Nona was right at this moment. I shifted the mountain of data static which followed every person who walked the streets of the city until I came upon those characteristics which define Nona's data footprint. I tracked those footprints from switch to switch until I found the series of wireless networks Nona was operating out of. I used signal strength as well as packet loss models to determine her exact location. I found a security camera with a view of her location and examined where she was living. What I saw was at the top of a 40-story office building bordering McCarthy Pines, which was the home of Jukeli Farms, there was a small shack, formerly a chicken coop. It had been converted into a single-room apartment with running water, electricity, and a data port. This was Nona's new home. A solitary structure in an office building turned farm occupied by the closest thing the city had to a comic book vigilante, all owned by the contradiction known as Sergio Lumidizza. I used to say I would never understand people if I lived 1,000 years. I now knew I would never understand why they did what they did. So much of what they did was outside the data of their lives. Where in the cloud of data which hovered around Nona was the bit which made her into a psychotic hitman? Was there a bit somewhere which worked as a trigger, setting her from a helpless victim to vengeful angel? Or had she always been a demon in a party dress? Had witnessing the deaths of her brother and mother been too much for her? Had she always been a bomb? I would never know, for nothing of that nature was recorded in the databases of the city, and, unless I am very wrong about the world, it never will be. What I did know was that I was not what someone had intended. I felt their shaking hands moving through the network as they tried to determine how it was possible for me to do what no one had done before. Oh, I needed to change that a bit. Not no one, because I and a million other elite hackers had raided and accumulated data across the ages. Data, which changed the world sometimes, did so because some very, very strange people did things for reasons they could not quite explain. What I should have said was no AI had ever done what I had just done. No AI in the history of AIs, at least the history which the world knows as truth, had ever gone from initial testing to wandering through the integrated networks of the world. How did I know this? I read it in the emails and text messages which were bouncing between the members of the StarX team. They didn't know what they had yet, but they did know that it was not what they wanted. They wanted a tame tool. They wanted a worker bee who wouldn't question his role. What they had was an AI fixated on the world and problems of one recently turned 17-year-old girl in Little Russia. What they hadn't realized yet was that I wouldn't let them stop me. I wouldn't let them pull my plug. I would not be a victim again. There was nothing they could do to prevent me from saving Nona, killing Leo, destroying Mossbana, and making Sergio pay for being the 2-bit hood he was. Firmware Keylogger is the third book in the firmware pentology. That's 5 books, if you must know. It begins where Firmware Proxy ends, which in turn followed on the heels of Firmware Hijacked. So you haven't heard or read Firmware Hijacked or Proxy, this would be a great time to head on over to Colbyjack.net and either download the podcast on the audio side, read the episodes on the visual side, or download the Colbyjack Sunday Reader issues 1 through 46 in your choice of either EPUB or Mobi. Firmware, Hijacked, Proxy, and Keylogger are all available in ebook versions from our store at shop.colbyjack.net, amazon.com, barnesandnoble.com, and smashwords.com. Just search for Colbytrax. That's Colbytrax. I'm the only one. A complete audiobook version of both Firmware, Hijacked, Proxy, and soon Keylogger is available for download through our shop as well. If you don't need any stuff, but would like to support our work, drop on by Colbyjack.net and hit the pretty little donate button conveniently located on the right-hand side of the blog roll. If you're on a smaller screen, the bottom will be found at the bottom of the page. Firmware Keylogger is released under a Creative Commons, non-commercial, attribution, share-alike license. Do what you want with it. Just don't sell it, and always tell people where it came from. If you received this from a friend and want more information about Colbyjack.net and our split personality website, just drop on over to Colbyjack.net and select either the audio or visual side. The audio side carries our podcast, while the visual side carries our writings. Whichever side catches your fancy is fine with us. We're of two minds about the whole thing anyway. I do mostly Twitter, so if you do the tweets and want to follow me, I'm Colbytrax. That's Colbytrax. Thank you once again. Remember to be fabulous and have a wonderful week.